By the power of Grayskull, Geek Legion is awesome!
Yeah, geeking is awesome!
Writer-director Jeremy Rudd brings us Diced Reloaded. And this is a 2025 slasher movie. Why is it called Diced Reloaded? Well, this is actually a remake of a 2023 short film, also called just Diced. So I guess this is the expanded remake version of that. So, what's Diced all about? Well, it follows a mental patient that manages to escape from a facility and goes on a bloody rampage. He had been previously responsible for a variety of deaths. So in his newfound freedom, he happened to cross a guy getting ready for a Halloween party. The movie takes place on Halloween in the 80s at some point in Seattle. So he dresses up as this sort of scarecrow type get-up and goes around and, well, dices people up, you might say. But there is a personal connection that he's trying to follow. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, let's talk about it. With the success of the Terrifier movies, we saw a rash of similar style movies that came out shortly after this, and this is one of them. And we'll talk about it again in the negatives, but if you do like the Terrifier movies and are just hungry for more, then you may want to check this one out, because it's very, very Terrifier coded. I mean, it's more than a homage, you might say. You could say it's a rip-off, but if you're wanting more of the same, then you might want to check it out. Now, what specifically do I mean? It's very gory, very violent. Maybe not quite to the gore of the Terrifier films, but it's still pretty strong. And I will say, I think the some of the gory moments, are quite well done on a kind of a prosthetic special effects level. They've stayed away from sort of CGI, using practical effects, and there are some pretty horrific death scenes here. People just getting like crayons pushed in their ears, heads ripped apart, all the kind of the bloody goodness you could possibly want. So again, if you want that kind of that visceral, bloody horror, then you might want to check this one out. I think our character of Benji, who is our killer, in this kind of Halloween costume, is quite a cool look, I have to say. Kind of looks a little bit like the Scarecrow from The Wizard of Oz. So he has that sort of that look about him, which kind of makes it a strange juxtaposition when he's kind of going around sort of killing people. So he's quite sort of distinctive look and quite kind of a fun sort of effects. I have to say, I really quite enjoyed the 80s setting here, and this is not a high budget movie, but I think it does a fair job of sort of recreating the 80s. A lot of the hair, the kind of the clothing and things like that, but also this kind of like synth heavy soundtrack. I kind of quite enjoyed it, and it's not licensed songs, they're kind of like original 80s sort of style songs as far as I can tell, but they're of the time. They kind of feel like that sort of that style of music, and I think it kind of goes kind of quite well. And just some of the sort of the characters that definitely, I think, pull off that sort of 80s vibe. The movie isn't overly long, so it's a relatively kind of punchy movie for the most part. Obviously it's trying to sort of set up a larger world and have a little bit more kind of maybe in the kind of in line for a potential sequel. So let's talk about what doesn't work. Now, I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to try and defend it. But this really is a movie where it's so derivative of another one that it really is a detriment. Now, why I'm going to defend that, I think, there's plenty of films that are derivative of another film, right? That happens across movies since movies have been made, right? And in a way, I don't think it's a fair criticism, because I do think you should view the movie and what it can do on its own merits, not discount it because it's maybe kind of like taking the best bits of another film and kind of redressing it in its own image. Can it stand on its own 2 feet, even though it is derivative? However, when a movie is this blatant, I've got to say it really has to come across as somewhat of a negative. I mean, there are so many things here that I think are just Terrifier all over again. Our main female protagonist dressing up in a Halloween costume. She's got a younger brother. There's a kind of family connection. Even Benny, he's this kind of like this mute guy, and he kind of does these like, he's not really a mime, but he's doing all these kind of like mime actions and things like this. Maybe the movie thinks it's kind of like, oh no, we'll homage the Terrifier movies, but it just looks like a blatant rip-off. And as I say, I think you can legitimately watch a movie which is derivative of something and still enjoy it for its own merits, because maybe you haven't seen the original, and like, you know, like I said, if something works, you know, plenty of movies have done that again. But here it just feels like it's really just doing Terrifier wholesale. And there's even similar scenes like in the original Terrifier in the kind of the coffee shop and things like that. I mean, it's just so similar. It almost is like, why bother watching this? You could just watch Terrifier. You know, so I think the movie, in its attempt to, you know, homage Terrifier, it just flies too close to the sun, and I think ultimately becomes more of a rip-off than a homage. And maybe that wasn't the intent, but that's the result, I gotta say. So there's that, and normally, as I say, if a movie is derivative, I don't necessarily mark it down, but this one I am, because I just think it's just too derivative. But what else can I say in the negative column? It has a non-ending. This movie just kind of ends, clearly trying to set up a sequel, but a very, very unsatisfying ending as it stands. What else? The dialogue. Oh boy, the dialogue here is terrible. There's so much clunky dialogue meant to kind of like set up things and try and have like this set up and payoff, but it's so unnatural. I mean, I don't want to spoil it because the whole point of it is that they're trying to kind of like set things up for later on in the movie, but it's just so clunky and unnatural sounding. It just doesn't sound like people talking. Oh, let's talk about my mother in this kind of like out of the blue kind of subject with my dad and things like this, and oh my god, the dialogue here is horrendously clunky. And it's also not helped by some not brilliant acting. Now the acting, having watched many B movies on this channel, I've seen plenty of bad acting. And I certainly won't say this is the worst acting ever, but generally speaking here, the acting isn't great. And there are some who fare worse than others. Let me just say that. I'm not going to point out particular performances, but yeah, there's some bad ones. So the dialogue is not very good. The acting isn't particularly strong. The story is derivative, and the ending isn't great. Is there anything else? I think the movie doesn't outstay its welcome, and when it has its kind of like its go moments, they're entertaining. But the movie has these weird meandering scenes as well, where you just feel like, come on, you know, like the movie just has scenes, these odd scenes here and there that just kind of go on just a little bit too long, and it just feels like this movie needs better editing, because the flow of the movie is a little bit uneven because there's some just scenes here that just feel like they drag. And then the final thing I would say on the negatives here is that the movie's sort of premise is just a little bit too silly and goofy. I mean, the opening sequence which is very gory and well produced on a kind of a technical level with the gore effects and stuff, where we have this killer Benji killing this kind of doctor. I mean, there's no security anywhere. This is a highly dangerous individual, and there's just no security, and he's just killing this guy, taking his time. No one's kind of like checking him. It's a like dimly lit sort of medical facility, which generally speaking aren't dimly lit. Let's just say that. And it just is so goofy looking. And you can say, oh no, it's all for effect. You know, it's meant to be dingy and kind of scary, but it just doesn't look like. It's so like cartoonish in a way. In its kind of like in its setup, and some of these scenes that happen in the movie are just so goofy. So I think this movie misses the mark, but there is entertainment value here if you want more of a Terrifier flavoured film. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad movie overall, but it's kind of like, there's nothing here that kind of sets it apart. And I would say, arguably, it comes across as a rip-off. But, you know, there's still some entertainment value. The gore effects are good. The killer looks kind of cool. You know. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. I do feel I'm being a little generous there. But I will give it a 5 out of 10 because I do think there is entertainment value. And I do like some of the technical elements. I do like the music. I like the kind of the 80s setting. Anyway, so that's what I've got to say about that one. What were your thoughts if you've seen Diced Reloaded? Leave a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Crack open a cold one with the Geek Legion of Doom.